Alex, I want to start with asking you something that I've been thinking about a lot when I'm talking to people today. And it's when I think about my community, my audience who's listening right now, what are you going to unblock for them? If someone read all your books, listen to your podcast, listen to today's podcast, what are they going to unblock that's been tripping them up, keeping them behind or holding them back?
I think they would have clarity on what actions were required to get what they wanted. And then at that point, they would only have to just think like, why am I not doing it? Which is a separate conversation. But there's a lot of confusion, I would say, around like, what are the things that are required in order to create a business, in order to create an income? I would say that I'm an objectivist. And so I just look at what are the things that are observable. And I think a lot of time people spend inside their heads trying to think about manifesting and energy and all of this stuff when it's like, we got to let people know about the stuff we have. We got to have something to sell, and we got to make sure that what we're charging costs less than it costs to deliver it. And we try and do that as many times as we can. And so each of those pieces obviously has frameworks behind them, but they're all tied to one thing, which is just what actions are required. And that's been the single pervasive frame in my life that has made navigating reality significantly easier for me, because I was very confused coming up and I was like, I don't know what any of this is. And I read all these self-help books and I felt more confused after the 10th book than I did in the first book. And then it was just like, okay, what do I have to do? And then that is kind of what has started this journey for me.
What's that number one misconception you hear when people are thinking about building a business, making money, changing their financial situation? Yeah. What's the number one thing you hear and you go, that's the issue?
I think they conflate sequence is probably the first and biggest thing, because a lot of people who are wanting to make money believe that the making money comes from investing, and investing is the last thing you do, not the first thing you do. And so one of the things is they'll look at people who are at the end of their careers and say, okay, well, these guys are making all these, these bets, right? If I just bought this meme coin or I just bought Bitcoin in 2013, I'd be super rich. But it actually doesn't take into consideration what a decision-making process like that would create, which is if you took a swing at every type of Bitcoin, because you can't just say, I would only pick this one. You'd have to say, I'd pick every single super long shot. It's like, we probably would have lost on 99 of the other bets. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, we have to take it in aggregate. And so I would say making active income cool again, rather than the passive bet and really just gambling, is probably the first thing that people mess up, is that they somehow think that working or active income is not scalable, when in reality, the people who have the most money typically have tremendously high incomes. And it's because of the excess of cash flow from that income are they able now to make big swings with riskier bets that sometimes pay off and sometimes don't. But you can't take those swings unless you have more cash flow that's coming in from the things you do every day.
You know what? No one's ever said it that well, like from everyone I've spoken to. And I'm so glad you pointed it out, because I completely agree. I have so many friends who, when they saw the rise of crypto or whatever it was, jumped in with a large sum of their life savings because they heard of a friend of a friend of a friend who'd made a killing, put it all in there. A week later, it dropped by like 10K. They pulled it all out. Right. The next week it went up double. And it was just a mess. And so many of them lost like 10, 20, 30, 40,000 pounds, dollars. And it's all because you're thinking that's the way to get there.
Right.
And it's cooler and it's smarter and like you're a genius.
Yeah, right.
And you're right. Actually, everyone I know that's made amazing money on any of that already had tons of money. And it was play money for them.
Yeah.
So it just changed into this. So what's happening there? Why is it that we've been led down this thought process? And how do we get out of it?
I mean, I think it's fundamentally the something for nothing fallacy of like, how can I get rich quick? How can I do it really easily? And basically, the more it feels like luck is usually where you should have your first red flag. I have a belief that if you control all the variables, then you can predict the outcome. Now, we don't always control all the variables in any given situation, but the greater number of variables we control, the greater influence we have over the outcome. And if you're getting into something like this and you're like, I actually don't even know what the variables are, then it's like you are 100% gambling. And so this is your life savings. Would you put it on black at the casino? Probably not. This is really not that different than that. Except at the casino, you have no nods at least. Right here, it's like you have no idea. And typically by the time, especially Gen Pop, kind of retail investors find out about something, it is the peak and it is too late. And so you have to be at the very beginning of these if you want to be speculative, which I wholeheartedly am not a big fan of speculative investments in general, because it's basically the greater fool theory, which is what they call it in the investment world, which is just like we just keep selling to the greater and greater fool until sometimes somebody is the greatest fool of all and then it drops, right? And so I prefer to think about, instead of thinking of investments and active income, I think of it just money per unit of time. And that kind of takes out this binary, or what I would consider a false binary of active and passive, and think, well, and I feel like I can prove this pretty clearly, which is we live in time and we collect money in that period of time. And so fundamentally, all we want to do if we want to increase our income is just think, what are we earning per unit? And this is where, again, bad piece of advice is like, never sell your time. It's like, okay, well, if someone give you $1 billion for an hour, would you not sell that? I would. Right? And so it's a question of how much is your time worth? And then that creates a much more actionable decision-making framework of, is this worth it or not? And to ladder up to the active versus passive, it's how active is it versus how passive is it? And it's my belief that nothing is passive, because there's always going to be a certain amount of, if you're doing it right, let's say if you made one passive investment, if you're doing it the right way, you probably should have looked at 100 deals, and all of that took time. And all of that takes diligence. And then after doing all this analysis, then you decide to make this investment. And so to say that it's passive, it's like it doesn't take into account all of the research that goes into ahead of time, which is absolutely still work. Now, after the investment, sure, but there's still time that you're trading. By first breaking that idea of like, in order for me to get rich, it must be something that I don't trade my time for, I think is like big myth number one.